Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of the Go 24/7 podcast. I'm Matthew Brune, and joining me in 30-degree Baton Rouge is Shea Dixon. Shea, how are you doing today?
Good. I've got my homeowner duties handled, got my pipes covered, outside faucets, I should say.
hmm
So good to go. Oh, at least it's not raining. Were you here for the ice storm? Was that this
No,
fall, or was
I
previous?
don't
Yeah,
think
that
it
would have
was.
been the last
It had to have
real
been
bad
last year.
weather.
Well, last year I was in Texas when all the power went out in the state, and it was and it was like 10 degrees, and people were freezing everywhere. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
not
this
fun.
this would have been like last February. So yeah, you weren't here yet. But
Yeah,
that ice
but
storm in Baton Rouge, South Louisiana, wrecked everybody. So this shouldn't be that bad. It's just gonna be cold for a couple days. But luckily, no
yeah.
rain.
Yeah, I don't handle the cold very well, but that's all right. We're in basketball season, but we always want to bring y'all a weekly football podcast as well, talking about the latest in recruiting, transfer portal. Once we get into spring football, we'll obviously be talking about that as well. But Shay, it's been another eventful week. The staff has continued to keep up the momentum that it picked up, last week, and I think we can start out before we get into all the transfer portal additions and the signing day stuff. We can talk about the guys that came back because we knew that Miles Brennan coming back was a big deal, and then we were like, okay, Ty Davis Price goes to the NFL, makes sense. Damone Clark goes to the NFL, makes sense. Some other guys make sense. Cordell Fly as well, but Micah Baskerville, Ollie Gay, and Jay Ward all return. And how important do you think that is? What went into the decision for them, and just how important do you think that is for this defense?
Huge. I mean, I think that all of them probably had different reasons for returning, whether, they didn't all have like matching draft stock or anything. And really,
Mhm.
all three of them you would have thought needed to come back for another year if they really wanted to up their stock in a big way. I mean, we saw what Damone Clark was able to do in a single season this past year. We don't obviously know yet where he's going to be drafted, but he went from a guy that a lot of people didn't even think should be starting to a Butkus Award finalist. So no doubt those three guys are going to benefit from being back. They'll obviously have a new coaching staff, so we see how that sort of sparks their maybe not development, but how they look or even develop into that final season, presumably for all three guys. I'll say this, and maybe it speaks to the importance of those three pieces. Is I could probably make the case, like if you were to say pick one of those three that's the most important one to get back, I could make a good case for all three of them, like that each of
Yeah.
them were the most important piece. Gay had a great 2020 season right when he got here. Obviously got banged up, this past fall and didn't get to play a full season. Was knocked out, but Baskerville, given they have basically no proven linebackers and he's played for a long time at the spot, and then Ward, really, I mean, they have no cornerbacks. If you want to move Jay Ward back to corner where he started his career, you could. And he's certainly the leader of the safety room and the veteran there. So I like all three of them coming back. I think it was all the right choice for them. I think it helps LSU in a big way. And I think we'll look next year. If those three guys stay healthy, that's three of the better players on your defense. So you'll look
Yeah.
back at that Monday or Tuesday of this week when they announced they were coming back as a really maybe big turning point for the defense, because I think those three guys are such critical pieces that, I mean, you're getting someone back now at every level of your defense that's got real experience that could have tested NFL waters.
Yeah, I wrote a brief story on it when Baskerville and Ward initially returned. This was before Ali Gay returned, like the next morning, I think it was. But Ward, especially in the back end, the versatility that he has, like you said, started his career playing corner. I mean, he might be better at corner than he is at safety, and I thought he was good at safety this past year. So he can play either position wherever they need him in the back end. And that's big for a team that, like you said, doesn't have corners at this moment. And I think they'll continue to add corners, obviously. But if a guy doesn't work out there, or if a guy doesn't work out at safety, if they want to start him over like Major Burns or something like that, you have competition now in different areas. And before Ward returned, I was looking at the depth chart, like you're gonna have to bring in a lot of transfers to stir up the back end, because without him, you like we assume Greg Brooks can fill the nickel and maybe Sage Ryan can fill a nickel spot. But outside of Sage Ryan and Greg Brooks, you don't have any versatility in guys that can kind of move around. So Ward's a big piece in that. And then Baskerville, if you know anything about the depth chart and just what the linebacker situation is, we've talked about it before. Getting him back is getting just a pillar back in your defense. It's like it helps hold up everything that this defense wants to do. I think moving forward, and he saw what Damone Clark did, and I think even though it's going to be a different defense, still he's gonna have a lot of pressure on him, Michael Basketball will. And you don't have to turn to a transfer, or you don't have to turn to a freshman or a younger player to fill that hole that Damone Clark had last year. So those two are huge. And Ali Gay, even not for nothing, the defensive end spot, I don't have the depth chart up. I know, yeah, you've referenced it before. I have it on my computer, but the defensive end spot is something that could use depth as well. So, and Ali Gay is not just a depth piece. Obviously, he is a guy that's going to come in and be a starter. He's going to be a great player. So, like you said, could be three of the best defensive players on next year's team, and that is a huge step, not only in that respect, but also not having to start younger players and transfers. It's not going to be a completely new defense at this point.
Right. I think you look too, and Matt House is the defensive coordinator LSU hired that Brian Kelly hired. He's still with the Chiefs through the playoffs. I guess depending on when you listen to this, the Chiefs are going to play this weekend. The more, they keep winning, he stays there. Whenever they lose, he'll make his way to Baton Rouge. But we'll see, I guess, this spring when we hear from him and Kelly, or even in the fall, what their defense is, right? And the players will talk about it, of what what the schemes are, what sort of the base set might be. But either way, and we're talking about that DN spot, take out Ali Gay when we were sitting there waiting for him to come back or not. Here's your other DNs. We're presuming Sony Fanua, who played a good bit on the back end, a senior, will use that extra year and come back. But then it's Xavier Carter, Jarrell Cherry, Savion Jones, Desmond Little, Quincy Wiggins, or I should say Philip Webb, then Quincy Wiggins, who they just signed. Wiggins is a big-time prospect. Savion Jones was a big-time prospect a year ago. But we've never seen, like, some of those guys have been in the program for a couple of years. We've never seen them really play any real extended action. I know they were having to kick Mason Smith outside at times. This past year. He's got some position versatility on the D-line, but when you've got B.J. Ojulari on one side, and then you had all those guys kind of in this mix for being able to play the other side, you said, teams can kind of hone in on B.J. Well, that won't be the case when you've got Ali Gay out there. Those are two guys on the end who are proven, who are experienced, who are now older in the program. I think that then allows all these guys, right, like Wiggins and Savion Jones and whomever else, Desmond Little, Carter, Cherry, all these guys continue to get room, maybe to develop, or maybe don't have to carry a big workload during the game and can out there, can give you some rotational reps. But I thought that one was huge. Like, when I'm looking at a D-line that includes Gay, Ojulari on the ends, and then pick your poison at DT. Like, they have like 6 guys who are certainly good and can play. We'll talk about another addition in a minute that they had, but I feel you feel really good about the starters, right? And in the middle, you've got some depth, but boy, the decision for Gay to come back, I thought was really a big one for the defensive line.
Yeah. We can move on to you kind of just hinted at it, but some of the new transfers coming in since our last podcast. We can start with Mekhi Wingo, defensive lineman from Missouri. I guess I'll shamelessly plug our site while I'm doing this, but continuing to kind of do some analysis pieces on players. Did Kyron Lacey, the wide receiver from ULL, today, so I have a good idea of what he brings to the table. I'm really excited about him. I'll get to Wingo, Frazier, Short, and West Weeks this week as well. So, but looking at Wingo specifically, do you expect him to be interior or on the outside, or how do you feel like that's going to go for him?
I mean, I would expect he's going to, again, we'll see what the defensive, whether it's 4 down lineman or 3, but I would imagine he'd be an inside guy. And really, when you look at, and he talked about this, I talked to him this week for an interview, and he said, look, he thought he had a solid year. He got named freshman all SEC. But again, sometimes not a ton of freshman interior guys are playing, and he certainly was one of the better ones that actually was. But he said, look, I've got a lot of room for growth, but he thinks being in a room with, I'm looking at the depth chart, Joe Evans has talked about coming back. He's an older guy, but Jaquelin Roy, Mason Smith has played on the inside, Guillory. You've got young guys like Bryce Langston. They signed Tyjee Hill. Now you throw Wingo into that mix, and you feel like you've probably got a pretty good rotation. Like, if they're, let's say, got 4 down linemen and are playing a couple of tackles, rotating Wingo in with Roy and Smith if you want, and Guillory and Joe Evans if that's the spot you've got him at, I think gives them enough guys, enough bodies to keep everybody fresh and not really ever have some like huge drop off. And we've seen, look, Roy's turned a corner at times. Mason Smith looked awesome as a freshman. Certainly Wingo's coming with some credentials. And it came across to me just from talking to him, you could tell, high character kid, kind of guy you want in your D-line room, kind of guy you want in your program. But I think he's driven, like he tasted a little bit of success, not wins loss. I mean, I think Missouri was probably like 600, 500 last year. I think they might have been like 6 and
Yeah,
7. But
they made a bowl
in
game at
terms
6-6, I believe.
right, so about like LSU. But in terms of individual accolades, he garnered some. So I think now he's seeing this as a chance to, hey, how can I continue to rise my game, but also be on a team that's going to be really competitive, and I'll be in a room with a lot of guys who will have a chance to play on Sundays. And it seemed like that was going to really be something that he focused on, kind of allowing him to push himself more. He thought moving from the Missouri D-line room to the LSU D-line room for him was one of those things where it was like, all right, I'm stepping it up, competition wise. Now I'm going to have to raise my level of play and my focus and how much I prepare. And I think that competition will be good at that D tackle spot. They've got a lot of young, good guys who seem to have that same sort of mentality.
Yeah, definitely. Tremont Shorts is interior offensive lineman. I'll let you add on to that. But West Weeks at linebacker, I think it's another big addition. I'll need to get into his film and get into what he brings a little bit more. But if nothing else, just from a depth perspective, bringing him in, behind presumably, let's say, Penn Baskerville starters, Jones, Mike Jones behind them, and then you go, to guys that are kind of unproven, like we've talked about with defensive end before Ali Gay came back. You had Josh White, Antoine Sanfa, Demario Tolan, obviously freshman, he comes in. So Wes Weeks is a guy who I could see coming in here and, if nothing else, being a really valuable depth piece for them, to where if a guy goes down, Wes Weeks has experience, Virginia, plug him in, and you kind of go from there. So we'll see what kind of skill sets he brings. But between those two, I feel good about their potential.
Yeah, and I'm curious if they do add another linebacker or want to. I'll be the first to admit I don't know a ton about West Weeks. I mean, he was just a freshman this past year. I didn't watch a ton of Virginia football, but like you said,
I did watch a lot of Virginia football, but not because of their defense. So there you go. But we'll get an analysis piece on him coming soon.
But yeah, it gives you a depth piece, and obviously you brought Mike Jones along. He talked a lot about kind of just getting settled from being almost like a nickel to being a true backer, and I think that he'll be better in year 2 or his year 2 at LSU. And a guy like Weeks can, and if anything, it allows you to bring on Josh White or Tolan or guys like that, Sampa, guys that we haven't seen that have been in the program for a couple of years. Do they start to get, some run, and Weeks also be in that mix? It'll be interesting to see. I wouldn't be shocked if they added another linebacker, just because beyond Baskerville, you've got nobody. I guess you could say Mike Jones has experience, but nobody with a ton of experience. And I guess another thing will be if Jared Small returns. I mean, there was talk in the spring that Jared Small was like going to be a starter, and Baskerville and Clark were there. So he got injured, tore his ACL, was out for the entire season. Former walk-on out of Catholic High. Does he come back for another year? I guess we'll see this spring if he's out there, but he could be a veteran piece for you. But again, I guess I don't know a ton. Wes Weeks will probably be one of the evals I look forward to watching, and you often have clips in there and reading about the most, because I probably know nothing about him. Didn't know who he was as a recruit, nothing like that.
Yeah. Let's move on. Let's get to
I will say though, on Shorts, I would, and I'm saying this because I know that a lot of interior guys are going to get this look. They need a center, and they don't have anyone on the roster who's like been snapping forever and is just like ready to take the reins, from what Liam Shanahan, Harvard transfer, who actually used that COVID year and got to stay another year for the 2021 season. So now you've had your time to figure out a center, but you also haven't had anybody out there actually snapping. I'm looking at depth chart. It would be like Charles Turner's played some in practice there. They signed Kimo Makaniole and said that he could potentially be a center, but I think they're going to let a handful of these guys snap football this spring and say, all right, who could be a fit there for us? And then from there, go all in on that guy as a center and just have him working nonstop at the quarterback or taking snaps or learning the position. And I definitely think Shorts is an interior guy, and what he's played, I think he's like 5 seasons. I think he's redshirted and using a COVID year. Could he be a guy that comes in and learns to snap and plays that 1 year at center and gives him some NFL versatility? I'm not sure, but I would put him into that mix. They're going to have to figure out with some of these kind of natural guards which one of them can play center.
Well, on a team where they have a bunch of new coaches, Brad Davis is the one holdover. So if nothing else, he knows kind of what he has and he knows what he's recruited to this point. So that's at least a little comforting moving forward here, is he knows what he should be looking for moving forward. Whether it pans out or not, as far as who he thinks should play, we'll see. But Jamon Shorts will be in that mix at center. All right, let's move on to signing days in like a couple weeks, Shay. And we've been talking about the portal for so long that we kind of forget about some of the high school prospects out there. Obviously, we never forget about Trevante Citizen and Jacoby Matthews and whatnot. But what has it been looking like for coaches on the road? How have they been approaching it, and just what have you heard so far? You're muted.
Yeah, so they all went out on the road this week, and the dead period is obviously ended. So you can go to high schools. They were at basketball games, track practices, dropping by schools, going on in-home visits, with sitting down with parents at the house or whatever it might be. So we kind of that's kind of the first time we've seen the whole staff together, like all these new assistants go out on the road. And obviously you're going to have guys like Frank Wilson, and now they've added Cortez Hankton and Joe Sloan's on the staff, a lot of Louisiana guys. And then we saw Sloan go national and recruit some quarterbacks. We saw Brian Polian, the recruiting coordinator, sort of go all over the country touching on guys. They were doing some 2023 recruiting, which would be next year's class, kind of getting their foot in the door as a new staff with those guys. But coming up, I did an article for the site the other day. So let's see. Coming up on signing day, which is in the first Wednesday in February, so less than 2 weeks away, I've got seven guys, yeah. 7 high schoolers that I would say have offers from LSU right now and are still being recruited. And in Louisiana, you've got one of the biggest names, and we'll put kind of both of them right there together, a safety in Jacoby Matthews, a running back in Trevante Citizen. We've talked about safety being a need. Obviously, Jacoby's one of the 3 best players in the state if you're looking at the rankings, and they've already signed Walker Howard and Will Campbell and gotten them to campus. So Matthews will be a big one. He visits Florida this weekend, LSU next weekend, which will be the final weekend before signing day. I actually, even with all the coaching changes, I really like now where LSU sits with them. I know Frank Wilson's been going hard, spending a lot of time in Ponchatoula as much as he can, obviously. Recruiting Matthews, I think things are trending in LSU's direction there. Citizen is one that I think is probably too early to call. He's on an official visit this weekend, and we're talking about a top 10 running back nationally. They didn't sign one yet, so or at least a high school player yet. They got Noah Kane out of the transfer portal from Penn State. But he's in town this weekend. He'll spend the weekend with his mom and around the LSU staff, and will be his first chance to really kind of have a lot of one-on-one time with them. And he and Kevin Falk were very close, so I think that LSU's having to make up some ground there. Next weekend, he'll be at Miami. He's going on a midweek visit to Florida. He just got back from Auburn, who a lot of people think is maybe the leader. So even though he's a Lake Charles guy, looking a lot at out-of-state teams, I'll give you a new name that we haven't talked about on the podcast yet. Wide receiver Caleb Douglas out of Hightower in Missouri City. Kind of, I guess you could say, late bloomer out of the Lone Star State. He had played some quarterback as a junior and prior to that. And then last year, Hightower had a run of receivers go down, and he had to move out to receiver. And then this year, he just blew up, and he got all sorts of offers over the past month, LSU included. He'll now be at LSU next weekend with Jacoby Matthews, at last weekend before signing day. And it seems to me, not visiting anywhere this weekend, that LSU's trending in the right direction there. And you're sort of now seeing them really rebuild that receiver room, whether it was adding Kyron Lacey, you talked about him out of UL as a transfer, or adding a guy like Caleb Douglas if he commits and gets on board, and you sign Landon Ibieta, and you've gotten Dre Jenkins to come back, and you knew you had that core group of freshmen, and then obviously a guy named Keishon Butte. So it seems like the receiver spot is going well. I won't list all these guys. I won't kind of kill all your time here, but Danny Lewis is one to watch. I think they need a tight end. We'll talk about this in the final segment. If I'm like looking at kind of spots they still need to find people at, tight end is one. And he had a really good senior year at Westgate. Bama just offered him like this week. So he's at Bama on a visit this weekend, Florida next weekend. And obviously he's got connections to Billy Napier and a lot of Louisiana coaches on that staff. And then it looks like LSU midweek next week. So You'd ideally like to have him in on a weekend visit. It seems like he's trying to fit a lot into sort of a small window here, so LSU's going to have to squeeze into the midweek visit. But he'll be one we're watching on signing day. We're still kind of keeping an eye on Harold Perkins. I know he's committed to A&M, but he's a linebacker that is obviously a pretty big name. So they've got a handful of guys. They've got 8 spots left, though. So even if they clean sweep all these guys, 7 guys they've offered, which they're not going to do, I'd expect them to get, maybe 3 guys or 4 at the most, something like that. You still got a handful of other spots. So we had this written down. I guess it's a good segue to have here, 13 days out from signing day, and then knowing that the portal's still active. I sent you the depth chart. If you're looking at the depth chart and you just know what you know about the team, and I'm giving you 8 more spots to fill. And obviously, a few of these guys are high school guys, so like they're already position specific, like a running back in Citizen, Matthews is a safety, a receiver in Douglas. But kind of toss all that aside. What is like no doubt to you, number 1, number 2 on the list of cool, they've added 11 transfer guys and they got all these guys to come back, but they still gotta have this.
And you mean in terms of transfer portal or both?
I think both. Just at all, I guess is my question is if you know what they've got now after this wave of double-digit transfer additions and the NFL draft deadline passed, kind of after all that, if you're resetting it, what are you saying now is still a position of like need for you?
Number 1 for me is corner. I think cornerback is just pivotal at this point. I mean, if you just name the corners on the roster, not including nickel, which Greg Brooks and Jordan Allen is kind of like a safety nickel hybrid. I like him a lot out of high school. But Debarius McGee, Ray Darius Jones, Mekhi Gardner, LaTerrence Welch. LaTerrence Welch is obviously a freshman. So 4 guys for 2 positions, and it's not just 2 positions, but it's 2 positions where LSU has dominated in years past, right? We've seen them recruit at a high level in those 2 spots. So I think corner is a huge spot to start with, and I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in several more names here over the coming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, think about corner too. In spring ball, you don't have Jordan Allen, and you don't, and you described him correctly, I think, as a nickel kind of safety. But even LaTerrence Welch doesn't get here until the summer. Had they not signed Mekhi Garner, earlier this week, I guess is when it became official, you'd only have 2 scholarship cornerbacks to get through all of spring practices. Like you don't even have enough players to go out there and fill a starting lineup. You're throwing somebody else in the nickel from the safety spot. So signing Greg Brooks was big. I think he can help fill that void at nickel. He'll be there this spring and is already on campus. But yeah, I think that I know a Louisiana native. I keep botching his name, but he's the Oklahoma State. He started like 47 games in a row.
I'm not gonna say his name, but
yeah, he's an Evangel product. He was actually on the team with Baskerville back in the day. I saw Baskerville was tweeting about him going into the portal this week, but that's still a guy that gives you a year, right? And I think that they're still wanting guys who have multiple years left to play. And obviously, if you're a high school signing, you've got that. But in the transfer portal, can you find any guys that still have multiple years that can help you this year, that can give you depth, whatever it might be? And I think at this point, it's just about I know this is what the LSU's approach is right now because it's the only way to do it. Every day you just kind of see who's gone into the portal today. Is it a cornerback? Is it somebody that we can use? Let's look at his film because we've gone into seasons last year. They had Stingley and Ricks, and you're like, okay, I feel good about corner, but and you can move Flott to nickel, and now you can move Jay Ward to safety, and you'll be good to go. Yeah, and you've got Dwight, and that'll allow him time to develop. Well, now you see how that happens. Like, you see how quickly things can unravel for you, whether it is getting hurt or, shutting things down or just not playing well or whatever it might be. Like, I'm with you. Corner's number 1. I know, like, tight end isn't the sexiest position to sit here and talk about, but Brian Kelly uses tight ends a lot. Denbrock uses tight ends. And Cole Taylor, who essentially got benched for Jack Mashburn this year, really got benched for Jack Besh first, and when they were trying to throw the ball a lot. Then he got benched for Mashburn when they decided that they needed to commit to the run but had to use an extra blocker like a tight end to do it. And he's your only scholarship tight end you've got coming back. I know that they just signed Mason Taylor, but he's coming straight out of high school. You can't really expect him to go out there and never mess up and be perfect and get the job done. He's a tight end. You want him to get bigger. You want him to get stronger. You want him to get adjusted to the college game. So they've got to find a way to still add a tight end. And especially if you're if like Besh's career path, and I think it should be, as receiver, and you're not trying to continue to just, put makeup over your tight end issues and just say, okay, he's a tight end and he'll go down there, and he'll block because he'll actually try and he's willing to do it, but he needs to be catching the football. He needs to be running routes. He needs to be a receiver. Beyond Cole Taylor and Mason Taylor, you've got to have something else. So it's not as important as corner, but I think it's up there in importance just because of the sheer reality that they just don't have anybody. And that's what happens when Eric Gilbert leaves the team and you sign Jalen Sheed and he leaves a day after he gets to campus this past summer. And then Jake Johnson obviously kind of flips on you in the 11th hour when Max hits the transfer portal. You kind of thought you had set yourself up well with a couple number one tight end prospects across like 3 cycles, and none of them are here, and Johnson will never even have stepped foot on campus. So it's a worry spot for me. I'm not sure if they can address it super quickly, but I just think that it's one of those things where they're just going to have to recruit solid at the high school level and try to add a couple of guys, but really cross your fingers that a guy goes into the portal that you like and that you can get.
Yeah, I mean, that's what tight end and corner, I think, highlight this more than anything, but I think this team will have enough talent to be good. Like, I think there will be enough talent in this team to win 8 games this year, or 7 to 8 games. Like, if everything goes right, obviously, right? If there's not a ton of injuries and not whatever else happens, if things go right, this team will have a talent of a 7-8 win team. But at the same time, it's going to be a lot of patchwork still. There's going to be duct tape on this thing getting it together. Like having 1-year players here, having a 1-year player there, having a transfer portal guy with 2 years there. And then that's when obviously the recruiting picks up, because the whole thing about having a new head coach was, and it's been this way forever before the transfer portal, was your first class is going to set you back. Right. And so that's where in 3 years you're looking like, oh, why hasn't this guy won yet? Well, his first class wasn't good, and then his second and third classes were good, but they're young. So that's where the transfer portal has helped coaches kind of amend that quickly. And so that's what you hope Brian Kelly can do this coming year. I think from a talent perspective, they're going to be okay, but it's going to, like I said, it's going to feel like it's going to duct tape together. Like in 2 years, going into the 2023 season, you're going to lose a good amount of guys, but that's what then you start getting your recruits in there and you start building from there. So that's my whole approach to this, is just get through this season, duct tape this thing together and it's not to say duct tape with bad players like Greg Brooks, Mekhi Gardner, all these dudes are good players. That's just kind of the approach for me.
Well, it is what it is. It's when you have 39 scholarship players at your bowl game,
Yes,
you're going to have to figure out some way to fix your roster in the short term. And is the transfer portal, the way LSU is doing it right now, a long-term solution? No, it's a short-term kind of fix. And I think duct tape's a fine word to say because it's true. And when I look right now at, like, let's say LSU is not in this conversation at all. All right, let's say this is Florida State or someone else. And I'm pulling up the 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings, and there's LSU sitting at number 1, taking double-digit players out of the transfer portal and out there openly still offering guys and saying we're still taking more transfers. I would look at them and say, they had a losing season, they have a whole new coaching staff, and they're leading the way in transfer portal guys. My guess is that roster didn't look too great. So the reality is it's patched, it's duct taped, and like you said, these guys are quality players, but it's moves you're having to make to even put together a roster. You're about to go through spring, like I said, with like 2 or 3 scholarship cornerbacks. I mean, it's just not ideal. It's a reason why I'm a little bit hesitant to say, oh yeah, like LSU is going to be competing to win double-digit games next year and all this. Like, you need to just find ways to improve. You need to find ways to stabilize yourself so that you can start to say, okay, we're going to build things back up. We're going to have guys buying into the program. We're going to understand then how long you're staying on campus, and we can have a better feel for how to manage this roster. I think before you can even manage a roster, though, you had to have one, and I think that's why they're so heavy in the portal. They're trying to put together a roster that they can ultimately manage.
Yep. Stabilize is a great word for this, because if there's one thing the past 2 years has not been, is stable. So the stabilization of this is going to be real interesting, and that's what's most important for this year. But talent perspective, I think they're going to be fine. Defensive line, especially. I can't evaluate the offensive line yet. I don't know. Obviously, this is all spring football talk whenever we get to that point, but I'm still excited, and I'm very excited for who they're going to continue to bring in because, like you said, they still have plenty of spots to fill moving forward. So we will continue to stay busy. All right. Anything else we missed
Well,
before we wrap this
let's
up?
here before we get out. Yeah, before we get out of here, and I'll ask you this because I've been answering on the board a lot, and everybody knows where I stand on this. I'm kind of a Miles Brennan stan almost, but there's Caleb Williams talk this week. It doesn't seem to me from talking to anybody that LSU's even recruiting Caleb Williams. I imagine he's going out west, and whether that's Lincoln Riley or shock the world and pick UCLA, I have no idea. But I don't expect it to be LSU. But we see kids enter the portal all the time, and people will, LSU fans will run to social media or the board or ask on the radio, Jackson Dart's in the portal from USC at quarterback. Oh, look, JT Daniels at Georgia's in the portal at quarterback, and all these guys. So look, throw Caleb Williams out there. I don't think they're recruiting him. But as all these guys go in, does anybody ever turn your head, or if you're this coaching staff, are you completely okay with Brennan Nussmeier in his year 2 and then Howard?
I'm okay with it this year. It does concern me that and correct me if I'm wrong, but Walker Howard's not he's recovering from an injury, correct? Or
He
he's
he got injured and played through it. I would think he's going to be okay for spring ball, though.
okay. Yeah. I'm good for this year. I would not probably be going hard after Dart or anything like that. I think Brennan is a quality transfer portal quarterback. Like if he was in just a transfer portal guy that we knew of from another school, he was being ranked before he returned to LSU. He was a top 5 quarterback in the portal, like from all accounts, and that includes a bunch of guys that are from major schools as well. So I'm good with these 3 this year. I will say next year, while I think Nussmeier can be a starting caliber player, Walker Howard can be a starting quality player next year, and this is going way too far forward. I shouldn't even be talking about this, but next year I'm still open to a transfer portal. I think there's very few years where I'm not looking for a transfer portal quarterback, probably just because of how many I feel like can be out there at once. Like a Caleb Williams, there's going to be a top 5 quarterback in the country in the portal every single year. And if LSU reaches the point where they are comfortable at every single position, quarterback is the one that can win you a championship, bar none. Like that's the one that can change the trajectory of your season significantly. And I think that they're going to recruit at a level to where receiver's not a concern, running backs fine, offensive line will always be, a strong point with Brian Kelly and this offensive and Brad Davis. The quarterback position is the one that can change things. And that's where I just don't think moving forward after this year, because I still think this year is Brennan's year. I think he's really good. I'm sold on that. It's about everything else this year. But moving forward, when everything else starts to get a little bit more shored up, then it becomes about the quarterback position because we know how valuable that can be. If not, then you turn into Texas A&M. So
yeah, no, I'm with you. I think too. I'm right with you. It's way too far to think, but you're right about what the conversation will be next year. And I think the conversation will certainly be that if Brennan stays healthy and goes wire to wire as the quarterback, because I think that kind of almost what LSU fans are feeling right now, and maybe the coaching staff doesn't feel that, but I know for college coaches, and this may be for anyone in any industry, unknowns are some of the scariest thing. And I think the transfer portal kind of dangles that carrot for you at all time of, we used to be that was just how teams worked. You had a starter and some guy sat for a couple seasons and then he made his first starts as a 3rd-year guy. Well, when you get into these guys, it's like Nuss next year. If he hasn't started yet, you're like, well, he's really good in high school. He's been ready for 2 years. He just hadn't started, but we're going to turn the page and we're going to hand the reins to him. Or do we go get this guy that we've seen play for a year or 2 now and we know what we're getting? And I think there's just a little bit of that with Brennan right now. It's only 3 games where he started, but he's been around long enough. He's old enough. And in those 3 games, he threw the ball a ton. So you kind of know what his arm is and kind of know how he reads the defense and how he operates. And obviously now that's 2 years removed from that by the time he gets back out there. The worry for me is just staying healthy. If Miles stays healthy, I think they're going to be just fine. They've got tons of talent at receiver. They can run the football. We'll see how the offensive line looks. I should say they have good running backs. We'll see if they can actually run the football. But good offensive line. We'll see where this goes. But I'm with you. For this year, I'm perfectly okay and comfortable with Brennan, and maybe even more so just knowing it's not like this roster's a quarterback away from like Joe Burrow level. You know what I mean? It's like they've got a lot more to worry about than Miles Brennan, in my opinion. So,
Exactly.
like Miles Brennan's like the 15th thing I'm worried about, or not really, but you get what I'm saying. So, yeah, I think especially being at this year and this transition and this coaching change, I almost think Brennan stabilizes things more for you than just going and grabbing some random transfer portal or starting a younger guy would have.
Yeah, we're gonna need your list of your top 50 worries leaving February.
I only said 15. If we're acting like Brennan would be the 15th, then yes.
I'm raising it up.
I have more than 15 worries, I'm sure. Don't worry.
There you go. Well, that's all I got. That's all we got for y'all this week. We appreciate y'all listening. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, send it to a friend. And if you're listening on any other platform, feel free to leave us a review, share it on social media and all that good stuff. So we will continue to have y'all updated on go247.com with the latest. Shea is all over the all transfer portal talk, the recruiting talk. Sunny is in there as well, Sunny Ship. So we will see how it continues to unfold for this team. And yeah, we'll hit y'all with another podcast next week. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to y'all later.